In December 2024, I scored my biggest win to date in terms of dollar amount. I made $9,190 profit in 34 days on the big data company Palantir, ticker PLTR. I entered on the basis of an EP setup where the market was impressed by PLTR's earnings, causing the stock to gap up over its all-time high, clearing all major resistance levels. This trade was a no-brainer and an easy one to hold through. Allow me to talk you through my entry, how I managed this trade, and finally my exit, which I got some criticism for, but I'll talk about that towards the end of this video. So without further ado, let's go. Now, before we get to my actual trade, it's important for you to understand a little bit about the company first. So Palantir Technologies creates software platforms for big data analytics, and they're one of the many companies that are leading the AI revolution. Because of the company's technological capabilities, they have contracts with some of the world's biggest entities, including Airbus, Deloitte, JP Morgan, the NHS, which is the UK's national health system, but their biggest and most important customer is the US government, who uses Palantir software for their military and defense sectors. There's been a lot of hype around this company, with many investors believing the company is going to grow into a $1 trillion company. As it stands, its market cap is around $190 billion. Now, whether or not it achieves that $1 trillion status and how long it will take is up for debate. The company has a float size of around 2 billion shares, which is double my limit of 1 billion shares. But the technicals and price action look so good that I just couldn't pass up on this trade. That's about as deep as I dived into the fundamentals. Now, if you've watched my other trade reviews, you will know that 90% of my work is focused on the technicals, and I've become consistently profitable trading this way. And in my opinion, it's not necessary to dig too deep into the fundamentals anyway, unless it's purely out of interest. With the basic fundamentals out the way, let's jump straight into the trade. So before the day of earnings, PLTR was already showing signs of strength. It had been in an uptrend since the beginning of June, and aside from the big dip in late July, early August, which was the result of a market correction, the stock remained above the 50 SMA. The uptrend had been steady, and I didn't consider it to be overextended yet. There was still room for further growth, and price was approaching its all-time high. A few days before earnings, the stock dips and remains below the 20 EMA. Now, I much prefer to see this as opposed to price rallying into earnings, simply because it clears out some of the sellers and can lead to a more explosive move, especially if the company's earnings are a surprise to the market. After the market closes on the 4th of November 2024, Palantir Technologies announces their earnings. The stock immediately rallies and buyers push the price over the stock's all-time high and manages to hold its gains all through to the next day. As a result, when the market opens, price opens up to a 15% gap up with just over 900% RVOL, which stands for relative volume. Now, I typically don't trade any EP setups with anything less than 400% RVOL, and this stock was over double the amount. I wait for the first 5-minute candle to set the range, and my plan is to enter on the breakout of that candle. Sometimes I would trade off the 1-minute candle if the company earnings meets a certain criteria, but in this case it didn't, so I just traded off the 5-minute chart. The first 5-minute candle is established and the following candle breaks above the high. This is my call to entry. I make sure that the spread isn't too wide and the range from where I plan to enter and where I plan to set my stop loss isn't too overextended. And all the stars align, so I pull the trigger and I buy 497 shares for an average price of $48.58. Costing me a total of $24,148. I immediately place my stop loss below the low of the day and wait for the stock to run its course. Now let's talk about how I manage this trade. My first target is set at 2R or 2 times my risk, which would be around $52. This is where I plan to sell 35% of my position. After 20 minutes or so, the stock runs up to around 1R, meaning that the price has moved up 1 times my risk. So I move my stop loss to break even. Now it's pretty much a risk-free trade and I can kick back and relax. So for the rest of the day, PLTR mostly continues going up and sideways. It never even comes back to anywhere near my entry, which is a sign of strength. And at the end of the day, price closes on its highs. That's perfect. I love it. The further away from my entry the price is, the better. In the pre-market the next day, the stock gaps up around 3%, which pushed it over my first target. In this instance, I sold 35% of my position in the pre-market for $53.19, which banks me close to $800. Now, if you're wondering why I didn't just wait until the market opened, where it could run up even more, well, there's no guarantee that it would, and the price had already exceeded my first target anyway, so I was happy to take partial profits as soon as I could. After reducing my position, all I had to do was be patient and allow the stock to do its thing. At this point, I'm waiting for a higher low to be formed so I can move my stop loss to below that higher low. This part of managing the trade sounds easy because all you're really doing is just waiting, but it's actually one of the hardest parts of trading because there's always a temptation to sell regardless of whether the price goes up or down. Anyway, unlike Reddit where I sold far too soon and missed out on a potential 10R trade, I was patient with PLTR where the price action was a bit more stable. So around 1 week after my entry, price begins to go sideways for a few days and then breaks the high, prompting me to move my stop loss to below what I saw as a higher low. Now there was a moment where I thought I'd get stopped out as the day after I moved up my stop loss, the stock reversed and nearly touched my stop loss. I talked about this in one of my videos, which you can watch in the link above. Luckily it didn't, and price continued to trail the 10 EMA at roughly a 30-degree angle. Now this is good because if that angle is almost flat, this means that price is moving too slow. If the angle is too steep, price is moving faster and there's a higher chance of a reversal at any given moment. Of course, given all scenarios possible, I'd rather the price to just go straight up so I can take profits much sooner. A couple of weeks later, the price creates another higher low and I move my stop loss up again to around $63. As more higher lows are made, I would keep moving up my stop loss, or if the price were to close below the 20 EMA, I'd sell my entire position. Anyway, I would end up closing my position early December and perhaps a bit too soon. On the 6th December 2024, PLTR gaps up and makes a rally. At this point, I'm conscious of the fact that I was up around 9R, and this is where my fear of giving back profits kicked in. Even though the stock hadn't gone parabolic or showed any signs of exhaustion yet, I decided to sell 80% of my position at $75.31. You can watch my video about this here. I also moved my stop loss to below the low of that day, which in hindsight I shouldn't have done due to the reasons I previously mentioned. Instead, I should have stuck to my rules and waited for a higher low or the loss of the 20 EMA. In any case, the stock gaps up again, and the following day, this is where it gets into overextended territory. This is really where I should have sold 80%. The market also agrees that it's overextended and it sells off on high volume, takes out my stop loss, which then forces me to sell the rest of my position, and the candle closes as a bearish engulfing. Now, had I not moved my stop loss up so soon at the end, I'd likely still be holding on to 20% of my position, since price hasn't closed below the 20 EMA yet. But overall, I'm happy with how the trade went, since I ended up walking away with a profit of $9,190 in 34 days, which represented a 9.5R return. Now, let me speak about some of the criticism I received following this trade. So when I sold the bulk of my position, I released a video about this and I received some comments criticizing my decision to sell the stock. So I made another video addressing some of the criticism I received, which you can watch here. Now, I'm fairly certain that all of the criticism I received were from investors who believe that Palantir Technologies is going to be the future. So they obviously want the price to continue rising. Now, these are people who either bought early on and are still holding onto the stock, or they might have bought later on at a higher price and have little to no profit. But for the record, I must stress that I'm a swing trader, and the job of a swing trader is to profit from the swings of a stock's price, whether that be over days, weeks, or even months. I don't have a deep interest in the company's backstory or fundamentals, nor do I care about the company's future price. All I care about is where I enter and where I exit. If the price action or PLTR presents another opportunity for me, then I'll play it again. But for the meantime, I'm completely done with the stock. As for the trade review itself, if you found it helpful, I'd appreciate it if you give this video a like, and if you want to consume more swing trading tips, all you have to do is simply subscribe to my channel. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you soon.